What happens when an officer drunk on his own little bit of power pulls over the one person who outranks him in every way that actually matters? This is that story. It happened on a quiet night on the outskirts of Toledo, Ohio. The roads were nearly empty, the kind of stillness you only get late on a weeknight, broken only by the occasional shift worker driving home. Lieutenant Colonel Renee Carter was one of those drivers. She'd just wrapped up a logistics briefing 2 hours south and was making her way back home in a plain government-issued SUV, dark, unremarkable, windows lightly tinted. Nothing about it stood out. Nothing about her driving stood out either. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't weaving. She was simply tired, focused on the road, ready to be home. But Sergeant Brett Holloway, parked off the shoulder near Hollis Avenue, decided he saw something else. His shift had been dead, no calls, no action, nothing but a cooling cup of coffee and a phone he kept checking out of boredom. So when an unfamiliar SUV rolled past, he tossed his coffee aside, pulled out, and flipped on his lights before he'd even formed a real reason why. Renee saw the flashing lights in her mirror, slowed down, signaled, and pulled over, calm, controlled, exactly the way she'd trained countless soldiers to handle themselves in any kind of encounter. She put her hands on the wheel where they could be seen and waited. Holloway got out of his cruiser and walked straight to her window, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near his holster. No greeting. License and registration. She rolled the window down halfway. Of course. Can I ask why I'm being stopped, officer? He shined the flashlight directly into her face. You were drifting between lanes. Didn't signal. Looked like you might be impaired. I wasn't, she said simply. License and registration, he repeated, sharper this time. She didn't argue. She reached into the glove compartment, retrieved her documents, and handed them over along with a calm explanation. This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee. He looked over the ID. You're in the military? Yes. A small smirk crossed his face. That doesn't make you above the law. I never said it did, she replied evenly. His tone shifted, edged with something more aggressive now. Step out of the vehicle. I'm running a sobriety check. She raised an eyebrow but kept her composure. On what grounds? I've complied with everything you've asked. I haven't had anything to drink tonight. I'd like to understand the reason. He took a step closer. You're refusing a lawful order. I'm asking for clarification, she said, voice steady, not raised. He didn't like that answer. He reached over and opened her door himself. I need you to exit the vehicle. Now. That's when Renee, calmly and without any drama, pulled out her phone, turned on the camera, and began recording. Just so we're clear, she said, this interaction is being documented. Holloway's eyes flicked to the phone. For just a second, something like hesitation crossed his face. But pride is a stubborn thing, and he didn't back down, not yet. Out of the car. Renee stepped out. Her posture was straight, calm, not defiant, just composed in a way that didn't match the picture he'd built in his head of who she was supposed to be. He had her walk a straight line under the streetlights as if she were some reckless driver stumbling out of a bar on a Friday night. She walked it perfectly. No stumble, no hesitation, nothing. He wrote her a citation anyway, failure to maintain lane. She took it without a word, got back into her car, and drove off into the dark. He had no idea that small piece of paper was about to come back into a courtroom and unravel everything he thought he understood about his job. Sergeant Brett Holloway wasn't new to any of this. 15 years on the force had carved deep lines into his face, and even deeper ones into his sense of self. He'd worked everything from neighborhood disputes to messy collisions, and over the years he'd built a reputation, the kind that made younger officers straighten up when he walked into the room. He liked it that way. He didn't ask many questions. He gave orders, and in his mind, the badge meant control, final word, whether he was dealing with a mouthy teenager or a driver who asked one too many questions. Holloway never backed down, and he almost never apologized. At his precinct on the west side of Toledo, everyone knew the deal with him. He showed up on time, did his paperwork, never hesitated. They also knew he could be sharp, quick to escalate, rough around the edges. But nobody really pushed back on him. Not until that night. When he got back to the station, he barely mentioned the stop. He logged the citation, wrote a short summary, failure to maintain lane, possible signs of impairment, no arrest made, and tossed his body camera into the charging dock like he did every shift. The footage sat there, untouched, for 2 days. In the meantime, Holloway turned it into a story for the break room. Had this woman tried to pull rank on me last night, he told Officer Sanchez, grinning as he popped open a bag of chips. Flashed some government ID like that was supposed to mean something. Sanchez raised an eyebrow. Wait, military? Holloway shrugged. That's what she said. Some fed with an attitude. What was her name? Carter. Renee Carter. Sanchez's expression changed. You mean Lieutenant Colonel Carter? Holloway paused. How do you even know that? She gave a guest lecture at the academy last year, Sanchez said slowly. She's not just military, she's high up. Runs logistics operations out of Fort Wayne. Bronze Star. Multiple deployments. She's the real deal. Holloway waved it off. Don't care who she is. On the road, I'm the authority. But something about the way Sanchez said it lingered, that small note of caution, almost respect, and it nicked at Holloway's usual armor more than he wanted to admit. Still, he didn't go back and review the footage. He didn't think twice about the citation. In his mind, it was already done and filed away. What he didn't know was that Renee had filed a formal complaint the very next morning, not just with Internal Affairs, but with the Office of the Inspector General. And she wasn't going in blind. The footage she'd recorded had already been forwarded to her legal team, with a copy quietly making its way through the proper channels of the military chain of command. Holloway went on with his routine, responding to minor calls, barking orders during traffic stops, carrying himself like a man who couldn't be touched, because for years, he hadn't been. Supervisors had looked the other way. Union reps had shut down complaints before they went anywhere. Over time, Holloway had come to genuinely believe the rules that applied to everyone else simply didn't apply to him. But this time, there was someone on the other side of the situation who wasn't intimidated, who didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't back down. She just documented everything, followed every proper channel, made the right calls to the right offices, and she had the receipts to prove it. Holloway didn't see any of it coming, not until the envelope landed on his desk marked formal inquiry. Renee Carter wasn't someone who made noise without reason. She wasn't dramatic, wasn't looking for a fight, and she certainly didn't have the time or energy to chase down every small injustice that crossed her path, not after 22 years in uniform, 2 overseas tours, and enough close calls to make most people walk away from confrontation entirely. But this time was different, because it wasn't only about her. She thought about every young soldier she'd mentored. Every civilian she'd watched get talked down to with no one willing to speak up. Every woman, especially every black woman, who'd learned to swallow her pride just to avoid making a bad situation worse. She wasn't doing that. Not this time. Back at Fort Wayne, Indiana, Renee sat at her desk the morning after the stop, staring at her screen. She hadn't slept much, not really out of anger, though there was plenty of that, but because the encounter kept replaying in her mind. The way he'd spoken to her like she was nothing. The way his hand had hovered near his holster. The way he'd seemed to be waiting for her to react so he could escalate further. She knew exactly how situations like that could spiral, even with a camera rolling. Her aide, Staff Sergeant Owens, knocked and stepped into the doorway. "You good, ma'am?" Renee looked up, calm but clearly focused. No. But I'm handling it. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. I saw the footage. Want me to loop in the base attorney? Already done. He hesitated. You sure you want to take this all the way? She leaned back in her chair. I'm not chasing headlines. I want accountability. And she meant every word of it. Her entire career had been built on discipline and integrity. Her rank wasn't something she'd been handed, it was something she'd earned through decisions that affected real people, through leading convoys across dangerous terrain, coordinating relief operations after natural disasters, managing personnel and resources across multiple continents. None of that had mattered to Holloway. To him, on that stretch of road in Ohio, she'd just been a driver who hadn't moved fast enough or spoken the way he expected. What bothered her most wasn't just how he'd treated her, it was how comfortable he'd seemed doing it. So she made the calls. First to the Judge Advocate General's office, then to the Inspector General. She submitted the footage and filed the complaint without exaggeration, without spin, just the facts, backed by video, left to speak for themselves. By the end of the week, word had started moving through military legal circles. It hadn't reached the press yet, but Holloway's name was now tied to an internal investigation, and the department's legal counsel had been formally notified. Renee kept showing up to work, kept doing her job, didn't bring it up unless asked. But behind the scenes, her legal team was preparing something more. Her attorney believed the stop hadn't just been inappropriate, it may have crossed into a violation of federal protections given her status, especially given there had been no real cause for the stop in the first place. If it came to it, they were prepared to go to court. Renee didn't flinch at that. She welcomed it. Holloway still didn't think any of this would actually go anywhere, not until he was summoned to appear in front of a judge. The envelope was plain, unremarkable, just his name typed across the front with a return address from the county civil court. He tore it open in the parking lot, only half paying attention, assuming it was some routine notice. It wasn't. It was a notice to appear. A formal civil rights complaint had been filed. The plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Renee Carter. The allegations: violation of constitutional rights during a traffic stop, including unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Holloway stood there for a moment, then laughed it off. No way, he muttered. No way this actually sticks. But when he walked back into the station, the mood had shifted. His captain, Russell Adams, called him into his office and shut the door, blinds pulled. We need to talk, Adams said. Holloway sat down, arms crossed. About what? The woman from the other night? She's playing victim. She's not playing anything, Adams said. Do you have any idea who she is? I don't care who she is. She got pulled over, got smug about it, and now she's upset I didn't roll out the red carpet. Adams leaned forward. She's not some random driver, Brett. She's a lieutenant colonel. A combat veteran. Her record is spotless. And she's got the whole encounter on tape, 2 angles. Yours and hers. So what, we just roll over because she's got a few stripes? No. But we're not going to pretend this is nothing, either. You're going to court. And if this gets out, and it will, it's going to be a problem. Even then, Holloway couldn't quite let go of the arrogance. She didn't even get arrested. I never touched her. I was following procedure. You were on edge, Adams said. You escalated. You treated her like a suspect before you had any reason to. For once, Holloway didn't have a comeback. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, word spread through the department, quiet conversations in the locker room, glances in the hallway. Nobody said anything to his face, but Holloway could feel the shift. He wasn't the untouchable one anymore. Everyone could sense it. Back at her base, Renee prepared too, but in her own way. No press conferences, no public statements. She sat down with her legal team, reviewed every second of the footage, and laid out her account of the night in precise detail. Her attorney, Monica Reyes, looked across the table at her. "You're sure you want to do this in open court? It'll be public. It'll follow you." "Good," Renee said. "Let it. Most people in your position would have just let it go." "I've let too much go already," Renee said. "This isn't only about me." She wasn't looking for a payout. She wanted something on the record, proof that rank and authority didn't excuse how someone treated another person, and that staying silent wasn't the only option. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone who'd ever been talked down to, dismissed, or pushed around behind a badge and a set of flashing lights. When the court date arrived, Renee didn't walk in quietly. She walked in wearing her full-service uniform, ribbons, medals, rank insignia clearly visible. She wanted the room to see her not just as a woman who'd been pulled over on a dark road, but as someone who had served her country, respected the law, and expected the same respect in return. Holloway was already seated when she walked in. He turned, saw the uniform, and for the first time, his composure cracked just slightly. But the real moment hadn't happened yet, because once Renee took the stand, the entire courtroom leaned in. The courtroom was full, not with press, not yet, but with officers from both the local precinct and Fort Wayne. Renee's colleagues sat quietly, in uniform or business attire, shoulder to shoulder with civilians who had no idea what this case was really about. To most of them, it looked like a traffic stop that had gone sideways. To Renee, it was the surface of something that had been building for a long time. Holloway sat stiffly at the defense table beside his attorney, Gerald Whitman, who leaned in occasionally to murmur something in his ear. Holloway didn't respond. He kept his eyes fixed on the judge. Then Renee was called. She stood, straightened her collar, and walked to the witness stand with the same steady discipline she carried while leading convoys through hostile terrain. No rush, no hesitation. Every eye in the room followed her. Her ribbons caught the light. Her posture commanded attention, not because of how she looked, but because of who she was. The judge, Patricia Lane, looked over her glasses. "Lieutenant Colonel Carter, thank you for your service. You may proceed." Attorney Reyes stepped forward. "Lieutenant Colonel, can you walk us through the night of the incident?" Renee spoke plainly. "I was driving back from a meeting with the Indiana National Guard. It was late. There was no erratic driving, no sign of impairment. I was fully compliant. I asked reasonable questions, and the officer responded with aggression. Her voice never wavered. He demanded I exit the vehicle without giving a reason. When I asked why, he repeated the demand, louder. At that point, I started recording. Did you ever refuse a lawful order? No. Did you resist in any way? No. Did you identify yourself? Yes. I told him I was a federal employee and that I was driving a government vehicle." The room stayed silent, no shuffling, no whispering, just her steady voice and the sound of pens moving across paper. Then came the footage. First, Renee's phone recording, clear, steady, damning. Then the body camera footage, showing everything, Holloway's tone, his posture, his hand resting near his weapon even while she remained fully cooperative, the unnecessary sobriety test, his dismissive attitude even after she passed it without issue. Nobody in the jury needed to say anything. You could feel the room shift. Then came the cross-examination. Whitman approached the stand with that careful, almost too polite tone lawyers use when they're trying to look respectful while digging for something. "Lieutenant Colonel Carter, isn't it possible Sergeant Holloway was simply following standard procedure?" "No," Renee said. "I was driving within the lines. I was sober. I wasn't behaving aggressively. There was no safety concern that justified what happened." Isn't it possible he was concerned for your safety, or the safety of others? There was no indication of that at any point. And yet you chose to record the interaction. Why? Because I've lived long enough to know that staying silent doesn't protect you. I wanted an accurate record of what happened. Whitman nodded slowly. So you don't believe officers should have any discretion during a stop? Renee looked at him, calm and unshaken. I believe discretion has to come with discipline. A badge isn't a free pass, it's a responsibility. That line landed. Even the judge paused for a moment before continuing. Then it was Holloway's turn, not to testify yet, but to sit and watch the footage again, this time frame by frame. Every pause. Every clipped response. Every moment where he looked at Renee like she wasn't a person at all. When the prosecutor finally questioned him directly, the exchange was short. Sergeant Holloway, why did you order her to exit the vehicle? She seemed evasive. Did she disobey any of your instructions? She questioned me. Is that against the law? Holloway hesitated. No. Did she raise her voice? Make any threats? No. So what led you to escalate the stop? Silence. Sergeant Holloway, were you aware, at the time, that she was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army? No. Not at the time. And if you had known? His voice dropped. I probably would have handled it differently. The room went still. It wasn't an apology. It was just a brief, unguarded slip of honesty, and it told everyone exactly what they needed to know. That night, Holloway hadn't seen a person. He'd seen someone who hadn't moved fast enough, hadn't spoken the way he expected, hadn't submitted the way he was used to. And now, sitting across from her with her rank laid out in plain sight, the whole courtroom could see it too. 3 days later, the verdict came in. This time the courtroom was quieter, no uniforms filling the back rows, no off-duty officers watching from the gallery. Just Renee, her attorney, and a handful of civilians who'd followed the case out of curiosity. Holloway sat beside Whitman, hands clasped, trying to hold the same blank expression he'd worn through the entire trial, though his jaw tightened slightly, almost without him realizing it. Judge Lane shuffled her papers and looked out across the room. In the matter of Carter versus Holloway, she began, the jury has found in favor of the plaintiff. Holloway shifted in his seat. Renee didn't move. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful stop and detainment. Furthermore, the court finds that the actions taken by Sergeant Holloway were inconsistent with department policy and basic standards of professional conduct. No gasps, no applause, just the quiet weight of consequence settling over the room. Whitman leaned toward Holloway and murmured something about an appeal, though he didn't sound convinced himself. The judge continued. While no criminal charges will be filed at this time, the plaintiff is entitled to damages in the amount of $35,000, and this ruling will remain part of the public record. This decision will also be forwarded to the Department of Justice and to the Toledo Police Department for internal review and policy evaluation. Renee didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded once, not to the judge, not to the jury, but to herself. She'd accomplished what she came to do. Outside the courthouse, Holloway paced near the steps as a few local reporters gathered, not a swarm, just enough to make him duck his head and cover his face with a folder. He didn't speak to anyone. He got in his car and drove off. Inside, Renee paused in the hallway, checked her phone, and saw the notification, verdict in your favor. Case closed. Her attorney caught up to her. You could have asked for more, you know. Renee shook her head. It was never about the money. Reyes studied her for a moment. Do you think it'll actually change anything? Renee glanced toward the glass doors. I don't know, she said. But maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice. A week later, Holloway was placed on administrative leave while an internal review got underway. Some said he might be reassigned. Others said it was the beginning of the end for his career. Either way, the protection that had shielded him for so long had a visible crack in it now, and everyone around him could see it. At Fort Wayne, Renee went back to her duties like nothing unusual had happened. She wasn't interested in being seen as a hero, didn't want interviews, didn't want attention. She had work to do, people to train, missions to plan, responsibilities to carry out. But within her command, the message had already gotten through, quietly: you don't have to raise your voice to demand respect, and you don't have to break down to prove you've been wronged. Sometimes the most composed response is also the loudest one. Even with the case behind her, Renee knew the bigger picture wasn't finished, because accountability isn't just about consequences. It's about what happens afterward. 2 months later, Renee stood in front of a room full of new recruits at Fort Wayne, fresh faces, most of them only a few weeks into uniform. She wasn't there to talk about tactics or logistics that day. She was there to talk about leadership, and about what it means to act with integrity when no one's watching. She looked around the room. How many of you think putting on a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up, some confident, some hesitant. She nodded. I understand why you'd think that. But here's the truth: respect isn't something you're given. It's something you prove, every day, through the choices you make. She let that sit for a moment. The same goes for power, and for rank. None of it is a shield. It's a responsibility. And if you can't carry that responsibility with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. In the back of the room, one of the newer recruits leaned forward, listening closely. Renee continued. A while back, I was stopped by an officer who'd forgotten that. I could have raised my voice. I could have let it slide. I didn't do either. I documented everything. I went through the proper channels. I showed up and told the truth. She paused. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable, until he found out who I really was, not just from my uniform, but from how I carried myself. That's the difference. That's leadership. The room stayed quiet, not the silence of disinterest, but the kind that comes when something actually lands. Renee closed the folder in front of her. Lead with character. Serve with integrity. And remember, you don't just represent yourself. You represent everyone who came before you, and everyone who's going to come after. She stepped down from the podium, not for applause, not for recognition, but because the point had already been made. If there's one thing to take from this story, it's this: authority without accountability is just weakness wearing a badge. Speaking up, staying composed, and standing firm when something's wrong isn't about making noise, it's about making a record. Silence protects the people in the wrong. Standing your ground, calmly and with discipline, protects everyone else. That's it for today's story here on Black Voices Louder. If it resonated with you, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.